everyone. Welcome to another episode of Becoming a Professional. I'm your host, Mangala. Riley is behind the camera working the equipment as we are recording from Orlando, Florida.
Hey guys, how's it going?
But before we introduce our special guest today, let's go through our usual housekeeping. So this episode is brought to you by the National Chapter of Beta Alpha Psi. Enormous appreciation for their support. Please make sure you sign up for their alumni member network if you haven't already, so we can easily connect and have you all experience all of the benefits that the network has to offer. A disclaimer, in this episode, the opinions of this podcast are our own and may not reflect the position of Beta Alpha Psi or our respective employers as a whole. So with that said, on today's episode, we have our second lecturer from the University of Auckland's Business School. So please show some love to our Kiwis. But did you know this guy also has a second day job? He's the senior manager at PwC New Zealand, Kayur Patel.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
So let's kick things off. Why don't we start with what your BAP story looks like, Kayur? Because fun fact for the listeners, I actually met you and I was like, wait, you're the international alumni rep at the time. So
Yeah.
I won't give it away, but yeah, your BAP story, please.
Oh man, like most things in my life, I joined by mistake. It was the Auckland chapter, the University of Auckland chapter were having an event, and I just ran into a mate who said he was going to this event and asked if I wanted to come, and I thought, it seems interesting, so I'll tag along, and I loved it. It was great. It was like a speed networking event with some employers. And so after that, I thought I should check this club out a bit more and see what it's all about. And so I did. And so I ended up signing up and joining. Spent 2 years on the student executive, 1 year as president. After that, I became an alumni rep. But even when I got into industry and I started my job at PwC, I was still lecturing at the University of Auckland. So I thought, I can still have an opportunity to help the club, the chapter, and still have a bigger impact on students than I would do if I was just lecturing by getting involved from a faculty advisor perspective. Mm-hmm. And so I've been doing that alongside Fred and Julie for a long time now. But it's good fun because I got so much out of being a student involved with BAT. That's literally how I got my internship offers, was through people that I met at Beta Alpha Psi. That was how I learned about the confidence required to do these interviews and to meet people, and how I learned so much stuff outside of the classroom. And that's helped me get this life that I've got now, which I really love. So I'm just trying to make sure I can stay involved to help other people that are going through it get the same thing.
Yeah, nice. No, we love giving back as alumni. I guess, what's the favorite Beta Alpha Psi memory that you've got?
There was a networking event that I went to quite early on into my time at Beta Alpha Psi, and I was so nervous. It was the first time I was wearing a suit properly. Hey. Back then we had to wear ties with everything as well. So
I'm still wearing one.
Yeah, good on you. Good on you. You're much more formal than me. But we met a whole bunch of different people from industry reps. One of the people I met was like, we've hit it off. Do you want to come in and have a chat in the office? So I did the next day, and we had a good chat. And he said, do you want to go for a formal interview? I was like, this is cool. So I did. And that's how I got my job. But that's how I got the job I'm at now.
There we go.
And it was literally pure luck. It was about being in the right place at the right time. And for some reason, just hitting it off with this one guy that I met. And so, sometimes you look back on your life and you think, man, where would I be if I hadn't just luckily turned up in this one place? And I think about that all the time. Yeah. That changed the direction of travel of my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, there we go.
Yeah.
So what, I guess, wow, you've mentioned it a couple of times. Beta Alpha Psi is helping you getting jobs left, right, and center, it seems like. But yeah, what are the key kind of skills that you think the Beta Alpha Psi chapter and in your involvement with it anyway, that's helped you actually become a professional?
I think look, we all know that in order to get into this organization, you have to have a certain level of academic ability, right? Whatever that level is. Yeah. I think the other things that we just pick up over time being involved in this organization is everything else. Yeah. And the everything else, in my view, is actually more important. And every year as technology improves its capability, is actually becoming more and more important. Yeah. So by that, I mean the ability to build relationships and the soft skills, being able to understand people in different perspectives, building networks. All of those things are becoming more and more important. That's the stuff I got through BAP. But even on the technical stuff, what I thought was really cool is that even as a lecturer at university, when we want to teach something, there's a bit of work we have to go through in order to be able to teach that thing, right? We have to make sure that it's appropriate for the particular course, involved with a particular department, and then all of that kind of stuff. Whereas if there's if a chapter of Beta Alpha Psi decides it wants to do an AI workshop to help people with prompt engineering, they just decide to do it. Yeah. And then 2 weeks later they're doing it.
Yeah.
And I think even with the technical stuff, the bit that I really got out of, and the stuff that I'm trying to help with now is, what's the technical stuff that's new and emerging and evolving all the time. These chapters can bring that to play now. They don't have to go through a process to get it done. They just be more nimble, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah. I mean, you've already touched on that particular buzzword. You're the senior manager of technology and AI, right? That's the title
emerging
that you
tech
have.
and AI.
Yeah. It's and that's the buzzword. But how did that come to be? Given that Beta Alpha Psi is like centered around like accounting, finance, business, how did you transition into that space?
Accident again,
Again.
I did law and commerce at uni.
Yep.
Because I wanted to become a lawyer.
Right. There you go.
Within commerce, I studied accounting and information systems.
Yeah.
And my first role was in tax at PwC. And in my job in tax, there was a small piece of work that involved testing this new type of tax technology.
Right.
And there was a director that needed a junior to help her out with that. Okay. And so she asked somebody, and the guy didn't want to do it. So that dude told me to do it. I was a new grad, so he just told me to do it. And I really liked it. I was like, oh, this is cool. And I've got a tech background as well. And anyway, she must have liked the work I did, and she must have figured it out eventually that it was me that had done it.
Doing the work behind the scenes.
Yeah. So she came up to me. It's like, oh, I've got some more of this type of work. Do you want to help? Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So I did a bit more, and then I did a bit more, and then it evolved to become part of my role. And then I just transitioned over and ended up just doing technology stuff. So first it was all about cloud technology, bringing in innovative systems at the time like Xero and TaxLab and these new things for New Zealand, which were really, really cool. And then working with Google and others, and it evolved into this big behemoth at PwC, which was awesome. And then one of the things that was very consistent throughout that part of my career was that it was always emerging tech. It was always a new innovative technology. And so we've got a small team that spends a lot of time on that, both helping the firm internally and then also our clients as well. And so AI is the latest piece of that emerging technology. I've probably been doing it for about a year and a half. And again, the same thing. Like, we need to transform ourselves as an organization.
Right.
So in some respect, like, we're client zero.
Yeah.
Because we got to do it to ourselves. Yeah. And then we can take those stories and those learnings and then help apply that to our own clients. Yeah. So that's what I spend my time doing now.
There you go. I mean, like, you mentioned that you kind of had to learn it yourself as well. Like, for the benefit of our listeners, most of whom are students, like, sometimes like GenAI or like emerging technologies can be quite complex to understand, right? So I guess, like, how do you explain that to clients, like, especially if they haven't quite fully wrapped their thoughts around like something like GenAI, for example, or any other piece of emerging technologies, for that matter. How do you explain that? Like, how can and also how can students like develop that particular skill of helping people to understand things that might be perceived as complex?
Yeah, especially with something like AI where or at least generative AI, where there's so much hype. And so it's hard to distinguish what's hype and what's real. And so what I found whenever I'm talking to students, whether it's one of my lectures or whether it's a Beta Alpha Psi event, or even whether it's with a client, you've got to start right from ground zero. Because there'll be a whole bunch that have never really played with it or understood it. There'll be some that have tried to understand it and maybe picked up a few misconceptions. And then there'll be some that are really onto it. And I think it's really good to get everyone on the same page by starting from ground zero. So, what is a generative pre-transformer? How does it work? How does it learn? Like, these basics. And I think once you understand a bit about those basics, you then very easily understand how do I use it. Because the common misconception I find with most people is they treat these models like they treat Google, which is not the right way to use it. Like, because it's not been built to be like Google. It's been built to be a human, kind of, and so I like by starting with the basics, and then that lends itself into how can you use it, and then that lends into like what are the business use cases, like what do businesses use it for, or what can they use it for, and therefore as a student, how can you become really useful so that you can help businesses use it for those things?
Actually, on that subject, on businesses, right? Like, can you maybe walk us through a couple of like, use cases or like some examples that you're excited about, like, within Auckland or outside of Auckland, that you've seen, like, because I think part of Beta Alpha Psi's mission is all about like social impact and making sure like, like we're doing like good. So maybe if you can kind of touch on that as well, like if there are any use cases that are more like, about the social impact things, and for the benefit of our students, like it will help them kind of conceptualize that a little bit more, right? Like on how GenAI can be used.
Yeah. Maybe if we talk about two different types of use cases,
okay,
and then we can talk about, and maybe it'd be good to have a chat around like how could these use cases be used for social impact. Like there's some big use cases, right? Like let's automate a call center. Like as an example, like if I call Air New Zealand to book a flight or to get a flight changed, right now what I do is I ring up and I speak to a human, and as I'm saying, hey, I need to change the type of meal on my flight, they'll be searching into their database to say change meal, and they'll get some information, and then they'll be able to use that information to help me or do something. Now what these call centers are able to do is use AI to listen to the call.
Wow.
So that as soon as I say, hey, I'm on flight number whatever and I need to change this flight, it just surfaces the information for the agent to tell me.
Oh, right, yes.
And then they just click a button, and it happened. And like it goes to the right place to make it happen. So that's step one, and that's what's happening right now.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say like the person was an AI, like,
well, that's step two. That will happen.
Oh, there we go.
Where, step two will be where you don't need the human on the phone.
At all. Wow.
But right now they've got these AI tools to help the human have that conversation. Yeah. And, there's organizations that have had, Klarna, for example, I read somewhere that the average call time pre-using this AI tool to do exactly this was about 11 minutes. And now the average call time is 2 minutes because the tool's able to surface that information faster. So there's like a whole bunch of like big use cases. Yeah. And then there's a whole bunch of what I call like small everyday use cases. Yeah. Which is stuff like, I haven't written my own email for about a year. Like other than a one-liner, right? If I'm just saying a one-liner, say, oh yeah, I'll see you there, I'll just do it myself. But if it's a substantial email, I haven't written it for about a year. And that's because I have trained my AI assistant to understand how I write emails. Like it knows the language I use. It's read like 100 of my previous emails. It knows, and so there's what I call the everyday stuff. Like just everyone who deals with text, creating emails, writing reports, reviewing stuff, all of that kind of stuff. The small everyday stuff where you can save half an hour or an hour a day. And there's a bunch of those use cases that are also very important. And when I talk to businesses, I think too many are focusing on the big stuff and not enough people are focusing on the small stuff. Because the big stuff takes time and investment. And yeah, that'll be good. You should do that at some point. But actually step one is just doing the everyday stuff.
The everyday stuff.
And so like you take that for different organizations, right? Like if you're a public entity, if you're like a local council and your job is to take public submissions from your ratepayers or from your constituents, how can you make sure that everyone's voice is heard in the most appropriate way? And there's AI tools that you could use now to be able to make sure that we're able to take that data and actually get some meaningful information out of it. But because it can understand verbatim comments, it can understand like language, and maybe you use a tool that can understand all types of languages so that you're not leaving out a certain segment of the population.
Right. Inclusive.
Absolutely. Tool, and because it can understand nuances, you can then take views of people that might still speak English or write in English, but not be able to articulate things as well as they might have wanted to. We're just democratizing the ability for everyone to have an impact. As these tools get better and better.
Yeah. No, that's great. Another important aspect of the AI thing, and I think something that hasn't quite, like, it's not gonna go away anytime soon, is this concept of analytics, right? Like using analytics, understanding like the outputs that you're using all these emerging technologies, like super cool stuff for. So for the benefit of our listeners again, what's the difference? Can you just explain quickly like the difference that between AI and analytics, if you think there is any?
Well, I mean, it depends on how you phrase it, because analytics is this umbrella term, right? For how do you take what is usually, not always, but what is usually data about something that's happened in the past to predict the future. Right. So how do I take sales data over the first 9 months of the year and try and extrapolate out what my last 3 months is going to be, or last year to this year, or whatever else it might be. And there's a bunch of different methods you can employ to do that, right? Like to do predictive analytics. Me personally, and I don't know whether this is correct or not, for me, using AI tools is just one way in which you can do predictive analytics, right? You can use AI to help you with that. But you've been able to do that for a very long time. Yeah. I wonder if the question is around generative AI. Yeah. I think the big impact that generative AI is making in analytics is the ability to query your data using natural language. Like that's the stuff that's changing, right? So, for a long time we've been able to build machine learning tools that can help us predict data, like use data to predict something. But I think what we're seeing now, even like these tools like Power BI and AWS have their version and all that other stuff, where you can write using natural language into these tools and say, create a graph that compares sales with XYZ and something else for this period, and it will just do it. Or create a forecast cash flow for this entity for the next 3 months, and it will just do it. But the generative part is that it's understood that if I want forecast cash flow, these are the accounts I need to think about. This is the time period I need to include. The tool's able to do that. Because before you would have had to create a formula. You'd have to write some DAX code in Power BI or something like that to do it. So I think if I'm understanding your question right, I think the generative part is just being able to use natural language to query something. Right. And whether that's in analytics, whether that's something completely else, it's just using the natural language to be able to interact with this technology. Right. I mean, like the question was really just like there's all these terms, like AI, analytics, like technology, emerging technologies, cloud, like all of these. It seems like it's like just it's just never ending. You head into a spin as well if you're not careful. Exactly, it's never ending. It's never ending. I guess for listen, like for people like students or even like myself, like young career, early on in my career, like. How do we keep up, right? Like, like, well, what are some of the ways that, because you're constantly keeping up with this thing? Oh, and I feel like I'm not. Like, even though it's my job, I feel like I'm falling behind all the time. Every now and again, I'll be like, I'm really across GPT Enterprise or whatever else it might be. And then they'll release something. Literally, they release something on Tuesday, and I've been here, and I'm like, man, I'm just way behind again. Yeah. So, look, I think with the rate of change with technology, you're always going to be slightly behind. Yeah. But I think what we need to be really good at, and what I'm trying to do, is be just way more focused around what is it that I need to focus on, because that's going to make the biggest improvement in my ability to help my clients. Yeah. And what am I just going to leave for now? Because I just can't I can't do everything. I can't be all things to all men. Yeah. And so I'm very specific around where I spend my time in the AI space, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that's awesome and so cool, but realistically, it's not going to help my clients. Yeah. And do you think it's also partially like what you said earlier on in the episode, hype? Like, as in, how do you like, sometimes it's like if you think something's a hype thing, like, would you then really invest like that much time in it, right? Totally. And this is the thing, because there's a real difference. And actually, this is really good for students to understand, right? Especially with technology, there's a lot of technology that's really cool from a consumer perspective, right? Like when ChatGPT first came out, what did we use it for? For like writing weird poems, creating memes, like all of that kind of, that's not going to help a business. People treat it like Google. But like that's not going to help a business. Like, how does a business use it to increase productivity, to save time, all of that kind of stuff? And I think one of the things that students really need to try and understand is, how do I take, if you're interested in emerging technology, is how do I look at emerging technology and say, what's the business use case
Yeah.
rather than what's the really cool thing, but it's actually a business isn't going to be interested in using
Yeah,
it.
like memes, right?
All I did when I first used ChatGPT was like try and create stories to read to my son and like all of that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like, but that's not useful from a business perspective.
Yeah.
And so what we've seen over probably only the last 6 months or so is proper business use cases.
Yeah.
And that's when it starts to become valuable from an employment perspective. Like, you know, it makes me better as an employee if I'm good at that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's actually, I mean, you read my mind. So next question that I had was around, like, how do you help students, because students don't have that, like, business, like, you know, they're not right up in industry or anything. How can you help them get that exposure to the use cases that you were talking about, you know, like the automated call centers? Like, I didn't even really realize that. So like what are some of the things that students can do? People with very limited work experience, say, like, you know, some of them like might just be in their first year or second year, and they're sitting there like being like, what, like, how do I kind of like get these use cases in my head?
Yeah. There's a few different ways, right? If you're at a school or a university where you've got a practical type of course on this, then that's useful, right? So like the course that I teach, don't have a textbook, don't have a coursebook. Every week I throw up a case study, and then I use that case study, which is a real life case study that I've done at work, to then teach on a topic. Right? Okay. So there are and there's heaps of lecturers that do stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So in fact, I was talking to one student in Beta Alpha Psi at this annual meeting, and she was talking about how her university, one of the classes that she's enrolled in, has a practical GenAI course doing exactly that, right? Like every week is a case study, solve it using AI. Like, how good is that? That's awesome. So one aspect is try and find the courses in the institution that you're enrolled with that's practical. Regardless of whether you can do that or not, though, I think you've got to do some learning on your own, right? And for me, that's YouTube and that's podcasts. Right. For me, the first thing is, once you've got the basics of that understanding I talked about in terms of what it is, how it works, all that kind of thing, I think the next thing you really need to try and grapple with is prompt engineering. These models have been trained to be like humans, right? The smartest humans you've ever come across, right? They're the highest IQ. They have 12 PhDs, whatever you want to frame it. But they have the worst EQ ever. They have the worst EQ. Right? So you have to teach yourself how to interact with these tools to prompt them in a way that provides enough context and enough guardrails to get a good response. Right. So I would there's heaps of YouTube and various podcasts that talk about prompt engineering. And so for me, if I was a student coming at this relatively cold, that's step 2. That's what I would be doing is learning prompt engineering. And there's freely available stuff that's really good, genuinely really good. This is not something that you need to spend money on. There's good content out there, freely available on those platforms that you can use. And to me, those are the first 2 things that I would do. That to me gets you that good base level. Yeah. And then you just go from there.
Yeah. That's an excellent segue into your second role. Like, you know, I mean, your second job. Like, I don't know how you manage all these jobs. Like, you're a dad and you're a lecturer and you're like, you know, you're working at PW as well. I guess how has your role as a lecturer been able to help you like influence, like, you know, you said that you throw out those case studies for all the students and stuff, but how can you perhaps like expand a little bit more on how you're helping the students like to really advance their knowledge in the AI space? Yeah. Like wearing the lecturer hat, right?
Yeah, So I graduated from uni 8 years ago. Yeah. And when I went to uni, most of the time, this is how it worked. I would sit in lectures in semester and the lecturer would tell me some stuff. Yeah. And at the end of the semester, I wrote an exam where I told the lecturer the same stuff he told me.
No shade.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And and if I did that well, I got a good mark. Yeah. Yeah. And that's cool. And that for years has been the most appropriate model.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably still is for a lot of schools.
Well, that's still what some do. I think that's becoming less and less relevant because we're entering a world where knowledge is becoming democratized. Just by having access to your phone, you can learn anything you want. And now with AI, that's just being supercharged. Oh yeah. And so
everyone GPTing everything.
Well, exactly. And so I think what's really important to learn are two things. One is the creative elements of things, and we can talk about that in a bit if you want to. But then the other thing is, how do you take this knowledge and then how do you apply it to a particular situation so that, in my case, you can provide your client with an appropriate decision to make. Like they don't care about the knowledge that it's taken to get them to the right decision. They want to know what is the right decision. And so I think from a lecturing perspective, I need to help my students have as much practice as they can at practical, real business decision-making exercises. So the way I structure my course, the way I structure the way I mark in the assignments and the exams and all of those types of things, they're all about how can I make it as practical as possible. And I try and, like, for example, I design my exams where, and my assignments and all that kind of stuff in the knowledge that students will use GPT. So like I actually, when you use AI to answer questions in my tests, and you should use AI to answer questions in my tests, you actually get very few marks for getting the right answer. Because to me, having the right answer is like a lot easier to get to. What I want to mark you on is how did you get there? And so there's some assignments where, like, I want to see a transcript of how you've interacted with the AI tool so that I can mark you on how well you've been able to use it.
There you go.
And like it just depends on what you're testing for and all that other kind of stuff. But I think the practical stuff is becoming more and more important. And I really think universities need to cotton on to that quickly, because because if we don't, we might not be as relevant.
Wow, that's the first. So like you assess like your students on what their prompts are. Right?
The reason I thought about that is because at PwC we've been training all of our people. So we've got 1,800 to 2,000 employees in New Zealand, right? So from an American perspective, we're quite small, but that's our that's the size of our firm in New Zealand. And like something like 90% of them are using AI every day. And so we're training them to use AI in all these situations because it makes them better. They achieve work far quicker. They achieve better outcomes. And in order to get them there, we're teaching them how to use it. So from my perspective, if that's the practical stuff you're learning in the firm, well, let's teach them that at university.
Oh, absolutely. So your industry knowledge then transfers over to your like academic hat as well. So best practices coming out of Auckland.
I don't know about that. What I will say is that it's trial and error. Like, I'm talking about this is the stuff I do. I don't know if it's right or wrong, and I don't know if it's going to work long term or not. All I do know is that things are changing, and if we don't try and change, then, well, we're going to be far worse off. And so maybe there's a better way to do it that I haven't come across, and there probably is. And lots of people will be doing different things, and eventually we'll all learn from each other and get to some optimal outcome. But I just want to try and do things a little bit differently, because the worst thing I can do right now is just do what I did last year and the year before that.
And then after that, eventually you'll be outdated, right? Because technology is moving so fast.
I mean, take COVID for an example, right? So I don't know what it was like in America, but in New Zealand, we had like if you started university, like a 3-year degree at university, which is like a business degree in 2020, you probably only had one semester on campus for your entire degree. And so, we all then transitioned to teaching people online. And I reckon, on the whole, universities, including myself, did a worse job of teaching our students online than, say, like an outfit like Coursera or Udemy or something like that. Because they've been built to be on. They're online first. That's the only way. They've been doing that for years, right? And all of a sudden, we had to pivot and figure this whole teaching online and all that kind of stuff, and how to sit exams online for the first time ever, and all those types of things. And that kind of showed so many of us that, one, if you can't pivot and you can't move and innovate quickly, you're in trouble. The other thing it showed me from a university perspective, though, is that actually the real value is not just the lectures, it's the stuff outside of it. What did students miss during that time? They didn't miss the knowledge because they still got it. It was just online. They missed the stuff that Beta Alpha Psi is doing. The networking, the building relationships, all of the stuff that Beta Alpha Psi teaches you outside of the classroom. That's the stuff that it was harder to do, right? They still did a bit of it, but And so I think universities need to cotton on to that pretty quickly
Yeah.
and understand that it's the extracurricular stuff that
Yeah.
is far more valuable now than it used to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Far, far, far more valuable.
Yeah.
Because if universities just focusing on delivering content,
Yeah.
yeah, I question relevance.
Yeah. Wow. Creative. You mentioned. I'm going to go back like a little bit because you mentioned something creative, and then you said like we might want to talk about that. I do.
Yeah.
So I still can we revisit that, like as in what you mentioned around like GenAI and I think like using the creative elements, was that right? Like what? Yeah.
There's no question that AI is becoming more and more creative over time.
Yeah.
But I think still what it's best at doing is process and logical steps,
Okay,
right?
okay.
And I think there's an element of human creativity that at least in the short to medium term, who knows what will happen long term, but at least in the short to medium term, that that is not going to be replaced by AI.
Yeah. Okay.
And that doesn't mean AI is not creative. It's just creative in a different way. And I won't go down that rabbit hole because it's a big one. But
Many rabbit holes.
yeah. But there's often multiple ways to solve a problem.
Yeah.
And there's a logical way to solve a problem, and that works.
Yeah.
But it's not often the best way to solve a problem.
Yes.
And the most famous example, this is definitely not my example, but Rory Sutherland, his famous example of the Eurostar. The train that goes from the UK to France.
Yeah.
And their customers told them that the journey took too long, so they spent, I think it was like £50 million to reduce the duration of the journey. And they did that by ripping up tracks and changing the route. And they did the logical thing, Rory says. They did the logical thing, where a bunch of engineers and accountants and consultants in a room and figured it out, and all good, nothing wrong with that. But actually what they could have just done is spent $100,000 and given everyone free Wi-Fi, and that would have solved the problem.
Yeah.
Because Rory's argument is that maybe your customers told you that the duration of the trip was the problem. Maybe actually what the problem was the utility of the time. If you're traveling for work, you can do emails if you've got Wi-Fi. If you're traveling for fun, you can watch Netflix.
Yeah.
And so what that are... and if anyone's interested in that example, it's much better articulated by Rory over like 20 minutes in his TED talk. So watch that. But what that example
shows... That's in the show notes. They'll go into
cool.
show notes.
Awesome. But what that example does a really good job of showing is that actually there's a logical way to solve the problem, and it will get you the right answer. But sometimes there's a creative way to solve the problem that's not logical, like giving everyone free Wi-Fi. It still solves the problem.
Yeah.
And the reason that is because sometimes humans, and we do this all the time, you'll notice this in your job as well, right? Yeah. Like clients will come to you with a problem, but often when you go into their organization to try and help them solve that problem, you realize the way they've articulated is not correct. The problem's not X, it's actually Y, or it's something else. And that's because as humans, we have our own creativity, we have our own proclivities, our own personalities, our own perceptions. And I think a big thing for students is to be able to focus on the stuff that makes us human, building relationships and understanding our proclivities and our perceptions and all that kind of stuff. So that when customers or clients come to us and say, I've got a problem here, we can help work through what the actual problem is and solve it in maybe the most efficient or the most creative way, even though that's not like the logical way that the AI logic will tell you to use.
Yeah, right.
Probably carried on a bit waffly there.
Yeah, but, got it. Yeah.
But I think it's that stuff that makes us human that is going to be more important for us to focus on.
Yes. Fair. I guess back to academics now.
Now
that we've explored that rabbit hole tunnel. Back to the academic piece. You mentioned before, like this is how you structured out your course. For the students, though, flip side on the other side, for the students, how do you think? What advice would you give them when it comes to balancing? I guess like academic. The academic learning, like the traditional academics, with practical experience, right? Because like for perhaps for some students, like if they're just Googling everything, like if they're just like ChatGPT everything, like do you think they're actually like learning? Or like and we might like you might have different views about this, but like like what are your thoughts? I just want to get your thoughts around like around like I guess understanding the concepts and understanding the core of like, for example, like if I'm thinking back to accounting days, it's like actually understanding that a balance sheet needs to balance rather than being like entering a whole bunch of like transactions and it's like figure out this, give me the balance sheet, right? Because I'm
Totally.
sure like ChatGPT does that and whatever, but like how do you help a student actually understand the concept, for example, that balance sheet needs to balance? Debits go on the left, credits, like, you know, there's aside from playing that
Totally.
song, like debits on the left, credits on the right. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
You're absolutely right, though. There's a reason why in our business analytics team, we still employ accountants who also have studied business analytics rather than just pure technology people, right? And it's because we need them to understand the accounting concepts, right? And look, long term, I have no idea, but I'm very confident that in the short to medium term, like if you're going through university or tertiary education at the moment, you absolutely need to understand those concepts because you will have no way to filter the output from these models if you don't understand what they mean and what they relate to and how they're actually made. Like if you don't understand how a particular statement is put together or how a particular type of analysis has been done, you've got no way to pass that through your own filter to understand whether it makes sense or not. And even if you know the answer is correct, you don't know whether it's the most appropriate outcome for your client, right? Because like, you know, that Eurostar example, there's actually two correct answers. Which one should we go with? Yeah. And so it's extremely important for students to still be able to understand the basics.
Okay.
These AI models, in my view, aren't a cheat code to get out of all of that.
Yeah.
In my view, these AI models are a way to help us become more efficient and perform better with our existing knowledge.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And at least right now, if you don't have your own existing knowledge, there is no way that you'll be able to prompt these tools well enough to be able to get you the most specific answer.
Yeah.
Because you won't have the knowledge to create the most appropriate, precise prompt.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why you evaluate your students based on the prompts that they're entering in.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Because otherwise, then they just won't you won't be able to test whether they actually understand concepts.
Yeah, and even with our juniors at work, you know, we provide this message to them all the time. Your work is your own output. Yeah. Regardless of whether you use an AI model or you've used any other piece of technology, when you provide that piece of work to the manager, when I provide the piece of work to the partner, I'm standing behind that piece of work. Yeah. So how do I have the confidence that the work I'm doing and giving to that partner is worthy of my name? Yeah, and I know that sounds a bit thing, but what I'm trying to say is you've got to own it, and you can only own it if you've got the building blocks to be able to take what you've received from the model and combine it with your own experience and your own knowledge and all those types of things. Yeah. To be able to trust that the piece of work is worthy of your brand.
Right. Yeah. Important.
Very much so. Yeah.
Moving away a little bit from the AI and the techie and the sort of, understanding prompt engineering side of things, what some other advice that you can give to our students and early career graduates around soft skills, like perhaps that they could be developing during their time at uni? Any thoughts?
Oh, hugely important. That's for sure.
You mentioned that especially during the COVID, like it highlighted that those are the key skills that they missed out on. Right?
And we're seeing that now. Like, I personally think that the year groups that have come into our industry that went through university basically online, they're not as able to get up to speed as quickly. Not through their own fault. Okay. They're still very intelligent. They've got all the knowledge, all of that kind of stuff. But they've spent 3 years not interacting with people. They haven't had the opportunity to do case competitions and do presentations and do all of that kind of stuff. So they're slightly less confident at those types of things. And in my view, it shows. Like you can pick that up.
Yeah. So we're talking like 2020, 21 grad, 22 grad.
Or like people that started uni at 2020 or so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the people that started.
Yeah, they might have gone 2020, 21, 22, and maybe 23, depending on what they did. So they joined us last year or this year.
Okay, right. Yeah.
And again, through no fault of their own whatsoever.
Yeah.
And it's not a huge difference, but it's definitely noticeable. So to me, that says, okay, let's have a think about what did they miss during that time.
Yeah.
And then to analyze that, because maybe then what they missed is some important stuff.
Yeah.
Because that's obviously changed.
Of course. Yes.
changed their experience and therefore where they're at now.
Yeah.
And in my view, they've missed those things that I was talking about: the ability to have in-person interactions with a lot of people, the ability to practice case competitions and best practices and all those types of things.
Yeah.
So what are the skills that you're practicing doing those types of things? And it's the ability to communicate, it's the ability to collaborate, relationship build, all of that kind of stuff. And each one of those skills like is quite deep. Like when I say communicate, I don't just mean be able to present in front of a large crowd. I mean be able to understand who you're talking to and what's their perspective. Like what are they where are they coming from when they're having this conversation?
Yeah.
And so how do I need to engage with them to be able to help them understand what I want them to understand?
Right.
And how do I need to be open to be able to receive what it is that their perspective is telling me?
Yes.
You know, those types of skills, which you don't really think about because you just pick them up through practice.
Right. Yeah.
But of course, if you haven't had the opportunity to practice, like anything.
Yeah.
But I think those are the skills that students need to really double down on, because I think those skills are going to be more and more important in a world where technology automates the processing, the logic stuff.
Yeah.
This stuff is what's left.
Yeah.
And therefore this stuff becomes more and more valuable.
The communicating, but before they automate us as well.
Well, look,
no.
I have no idea. Like all of this is short to medium term. I have no idea what's going to happen long term, right?
Yeah.
But I am very confident that in the short to medium term, on the whole, because I always get this question, AI is not going to replace us.
Yeah.
But those of us that use AI well will definitely replace those of us that don't.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, on that note, any thoughts on, final question, any thoughts on the future of education then, because of the whole AI analytics,
The best thing from education perspective is I think education is going to become democratized.
Okay.
And depending on which position you set within this world of education, that can be quite scary, or you can be quite optimistic about it.
Yeah.
Everyone is going to have the smartest thing ever in their pockets, right?
Yeah.
So what does that do for a kid that can't afford to go to uni? I mean, that's just amazing. Like right now, no matter what country, it's just levels of it. No matter what country you're in, education is kind of a privilege. Like tertiary level education, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not cheap.
Yeah.
And not only is it not cheap, it takes a lot of time investment.
Yeah.
If you've got to support a family
That's
or
right. That's right. Yeah.
And I think we've got an amazing opportunity to democratize education.
Mm-hmm.
We can put knowledge in the hands of everyone, which is awesome. Now, for some of us, that's going to be scary because there are people that have made a living and made a career out of being able to provide education to a select few, right? And that's just the way it's worked. But I think the world of education is going to change because knowledge is going to become cheaply available to everyone. And I think that's amazing. I think people like myself, educators, we're going to have to really figure out how to pivot.
Yeah.
Like really, and yes, that is scary, but I mean, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
It's worth it. And I don't know how we're going to, I don't know what that's going to look like, but as far as I can tell, at least right now, that involves educating in a way that is on the practical elements of what you'll be doing in the real world, rather than just focusing on the knowledge.
Yes, and to borrow a phrase that I've learned from you today, cotton on to it, right?
Yeah.
That's a Kiwi thing though, like.
I haven't heard
of
it's
it
also
in
a brand of clothing as well. Which now I'm thinking about it, but yeah.
No, anyway, all right, cool. Well, that's thank you so much again, Kayur.
No worries,
it's
man.
been a pleasure. I mean, to be honest, like for all those years ago, like when I was first coming into Beta Alpha Psi, and then I saw you like as the international rep, I was like, I got to be like this guy one day, like so.
Oh, now look what you're doing, running podcasts and everything. Apparently, amazing job.
Well, no, it's all shout out to Riley as well. Riley behind the camera.
Thank you.
Yeah. He's got all this professional gear set up.
It's like this is a perfect example of what I mean by democratizing knowledge.
Yeah.
Right. So what you guys can do is have really good practical conversations with people.
Yeah.
Make that freely available to anyone who wants to listen.
That's it.
And you can synthesize that knowledge down just by having a conversation
Yeah.
to anyone, right? And
Yeah.
you look at some of the most amazing podcasts out there. That's all
Yeah.
about disseminating knowledge to people.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean. Like, we live in an amazing world from an education perspective.
We're just trying to do our own bit.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Yeah. But yeah, the educators have to cotton on. Anyway, so yes, we can definitely sit here all day and talk, I'm sure, Kaya, about all of the different soft skills, technical skills required. But yes, again, that's all we have the time for. Thank you so much for being our special guest on this podcast. It was such a pleasure to hear your story as well. And for everyone else, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us from whatever platform you're following from. Also, check out the show notes, because I think you've mentioned the TEDx talk, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's it. Check out the show notes from our various social media pages, and also follow us for the BAP swag. Once again, thank you, Kaya. And with
pleasure.
that, we'll see everyone on the next episode of Becoming a Professional.
Hey everyone, Riley here with the credits. This episode, titled Auckland AI and Academics, was hosted by Mangala, produced by myself, Riley Ramos, and accompanied by our special guest, Kayur Patel. Music was sourced from Resolute Audio and fine-tuned music on Adobe Stock. Huge shout out to Beta Alpha Psi for their financial support and keeping the podcast going strong. If you haven't already, please join the Alumni and Member Network. Details can be found in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode of Becoming a Professional.